Okay, so thank you. I thought that last presentation was great. We could talk a lot about it. Just a few comments. We just got a tropical disease voucher for the treatment of river blindness. So just a general comment is I understand the problems, but part of the issue is it really helps these companies with rare diseases to recoup some of their money, and also they can't necessarily charge what big pharma charges, or they don't have 10,000 or 10 million patients. So it's a complicated thing, but it's all doable. A general comment about orphan drugs: it's different in Europe than in the U.S. in the sense of you can get something cleared in the U.S. and not in Europe. In general, we found that it's much easier to get products in the U.S. Like we just did one for Dravet syndrome where the data came out of zebrafish. The FDA had no trouble doing it. The EMA had a lot of problems. And also with breakthrough devices, and I'm just saying this, we're sort of in the trenches, so we actually have to do all these things. We're working, it was an expedited access program for a unique Alzheimer's disease diagnostic that came out of NIH, and that just got breakthrough. And what it really means is, in principle, FDA, you can go back and forth with emails with FDA and they'll actually respond quickly. And the other thing is with these very rare diseases, or even not so rare, but orphan diseases, what we're pushing now, and FDA is actually accepting a bit of this concept of the totality of the evidence, because you can't always get statistical significance in these small populations. There was issues with running placebo, clearly. We'll share some studies where we didn't do placebo and the product got approved. So you have to think about these things. Okay. Let's see how we do here. Okay. This is now, so I'll try to keep the sheet of time. So just as a background of who we are, so Target Health, we're based in Manhattan. So we're a full-service CRO. We take products from preclinical, usually at the tox phase, so you have to have a product for us to work on it, and we can take everything in a virtual sense. We also have developed a full paperless clinical trial platform. And I want you to know that in the back is my friend Scott Mellis from Regeneron, who's talking later, and we'll put a pitch, because the two of us, a long time ago, really championed Regeneron's first drug approval, okay, in a very rare disease. So it's very nice that he's here. So welcome. So he can share some of the experience also. So we've actually gotten these products to the market. Because it's easy sometimes to talk about it, but to actually execute it is a whole other ballgame. So we just got I don't want to get too much, but just say experience. So we have a list of products that we've gotten orphan drug designated. We're talking about just in the U.S. for now. And actually with Alagille syndrome, I won't say what the company is, but a good friend of mine from J&J, and they just approached us. They want to revitalize this program from about 15 years ago, where we got orphan designation, but they got some new ideas. And we've gotten a couple of things approved. We got a debridement product that was actually derived from pineapple. This is a company called MediWound in Israel. That actually debrides the skin in third-degree burns patients. We worked with, and continue to work with Protalix out of Israel. We did Gaucher disease with them, and I'll go through a little more detail. But when we got that approved with 30 patients and no placebo, and that Pfizer is now selling that. And hereditary angioedema, we did a product. We took it early with a company called Jurini out of Berlin. Eventually got sold to Shire, but we did all the early work, and that was approved in 2011. And then I think one of the most exciting ones we got was rabies. Okay, actually we have a rabies orphan drug designation. There aren't too many cases of rabies in the U.S., but places like India, it's actually, they call it somewhat endemic. So don't get bitten by a dog in certain areas. So and it's not trivial to get it. Sometimes we got to negotiate with FDA on all these things, and this issue of the subpopulations, which came up earlier. FDA is pretty smart. You know, we tried to once get CD4 counts under 200 for HIV. The FDA said, what's going to prevent someone from being treated with CD4 of 201? So they turned it down. So they're pretty savvy, and we're now doing Tourette syndrome. There actually is orphan drug designations for Tourette's, and you have to argue that the mild patients won't be treated with this drug ever. And we're right now going back and forth with FDA. So sometimes you have to negotiate with them and see what's going on. Okay, so in terms of experience, so I just want to talk about the rare diseases and some of the novel stuff. So Gaucher, we got approved. We have ongoing programs in Fabry disease that's going all over the world. We've got an interesting program going on in Brazil in stem cells for Huntington's disease. Can't talk more about it, but can't talk much about it. In scleroderma, the issue there was that we inherited something from NIH, and I think FDA really didn't understand the value of some of these things, so we had a big negotiations back and forth, and then some gene therapy stuff. So here's now the thrust of what I want to talk about. So, and that is, you know, how to really approach FDA. So the first thing I tell to my academic friends, because we do some translational medicine with Rutgers and SUNY Stony Brook and New York Medical College and now Einstein, is everything you think about in science, and I love your science stuff. Okay, I'm going to ask you how we're going to commercialize it, but that's another question. I used to be a scientist, so. But when I was at Pfizer, I decided to get an MBA because they treated the MDs better than the Ph.D. So if you're thinking about business, get that MBA. It helps. So my point is, it's all counterintuitive. Don't, if you're a scientist and you're a great researcher, don't try to convince the regulatory people that they're wrong. Okay? Because we don't say you're wrong, but it's very different. We're battling now with one of our clients. I actually had to tell them yesterday that they were wrong, and this was a brilliant scientist out of NIH, and you know, Jules, I don't agree with you, you know, kind of thing. And it's not the question you agree with me, is what FDA is going to agree. And they think very differently, and they have other responsibilities. They're good scientists, and they're much better than you may think. They're really smart people, but they also have legislation, they have rules, they have regulations, they have laws, and a little bit of politics, and also precedent. So if they did someone else, if they said no to somebody else, they're going to say no to you unless you figure out how to get them to say yes. So the first thing we have to do when we work with FDA is good science. So we heard the good science today, that's for sure. We need to have good medicine, so it has to be a disease that we have to treat, so it could be, you know, hospital-based infections. And then the other thing is the good regulations, and it's not complicated, it's at all. And the other is, you have to be transparent. As my friends in J&J would say, the one thing you don't want to do is you don't want to basically break into jail. So what you don't want to do is say something that FDA is immediately going to say no. But if it's real, you don't try to hide it, because they show up with badges. This happened once, not with us, but somebody showed up. I had to go to Chicago to keep somebody out of jail, and the inspector, he showed up with a badge, you know, and he said, it was good you're here because this guy would have been in trouble. But he actually was a good guy. He just didn't understand FDA, and he said things at a meeting he should never have said, and they weren't even true, but it was completely wrong. So, and you got to hire people like the Mitchel people or us, or somebody who really knows and understands, but can also understand what you're doing, because you got to be able to understand the science as well as the medicine. And I think you have to think and now we're talking specifically about rare and orphan diseases. So you look at precedent, look at what was done previously, what did FDA approve, and how did they approve it, and the mechanism, and do they, I'll give you like Fabrazyme now, FDA says even though they approved it based on a surrogate biomarker, they don't have evidence from their point of view that it actually works. Okay, so it's a complicated concept. So you have to look at things that are done in the past, and you go to the FDA website, summary basis of approval, things that we used to spend a lot of time doing, you can find out in 5 minutes. Don't tell that to people who charge you by the hour, you know, that really takes 5 minutes. But that's why we add value, okay. Then here's 3 very important things when you deal with orphan diseases, and it's really bizarre, because we work with some of the patient advocates at the Clinical Trial Transformation Initiative, people who actually show up completely paralyzed or have a very rare disease. And so there are 3 things you got to deal with. One is what the clinicians like. So the clinicians like to measure something, but it may or may not be relevant to the patient. So for example, in Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, because there was a big conference on it, is everybody likes walking time. And we have another project that we may get that has to do with walking time. 6-minute walk, like in, okay. So what happens is that the kids with Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, they accept the fact, and I'm being a little glib, but forgive me, but they accept the fact that they may not be able to walk very fast, but they really want to be able to work on their iPhone and their iPad. That's really important, that they can communicate with their friends. So they may not be able to walk, but if all of a sudden they couldn't communicate with their friends and now they can, that's very important. And you could work with FDA on that stuff. So find out what's important to the patient. There's a whole group, I met someone earlier today, and my friend Jeff Casher, who used to be at I couldn't remember his name before, so now you know who it is. He was at Lilly, and now he's really working on patient advocacy and what's important to the patient. And I think it's really important that you stress that with FDA, because you need that totality of the evidence. And the other is what's important to the caregiver. If you have a situation with a caregiver, let's say an Alzheimer's disease or something that's not orphan disease, but what's important to the caregiver? You know, are they getting a good night's sleep? That kind of stuff. You know, and you may be able to argue that with FDA. So I just have one little. I usually give more philosophy, but I don't have time to do my philosophy. So I have called Jules Rules, but the one thing is that for every hour you plan, you have 10 hours that you don't plan. You save 10 hours of chaos. And also, if you're talking about something too much, then you really probably don't understand it. The other is, don't be afraid to ask FDA if you have some ideas. Many years ago, I did the RX, after I left Pfizer, I did the RX OTC switch with Visine A, and Mark Abelson and Wiley Chambers, Wiley was at FDA, they developed a model system to look at allergic eyes. And I said to the client who was licensed this thing to Pfizer, I said, why don't we just use that model system? Wiley did it, Mark did it. They said, oh, no, we'll never fly. And I said, well, why don't we just ask? And when we went to the FDA meeting, we asked that question, you know, in the briefing book and all that. And Wiley said, sure, why not? Use the model system. So there it is. We took people and just put allergens in their eyes and put the drug in their eye and see whether they had itchy and red eyes. Then he said, I want 150 people treated for 8 weeks who have allergic eyes, but I don't care if they have them at the time. Just have them put the eye drop in every day, and that's how it got switched. Okay, so don't be afraid to ask FDA, but you have to go with professionals who know how to ask these questions, because the last thing you don't want to do is FDA to say no. Okay, no is a really bad thing from FDA, because once one person says no, and again, if it's not an important thing, it's okay they say no. And sometimes we ask them questions where we let them say no because we don't care that they say no, because we know what we need to do. And it's a little bit of a game, but you don't want one where they say no and they really mean it, and then all of a sudden you got another $10 million you have to spend. And that's not a good thing. Because once they dig their heels in, it's very hard to get them to change. Also, never, when you go to FDA, never ask them, what do we do? Okay, tell them what you're going to do. And if you got something really interesting, you know, work with them. But you got to show them it's all about the data. You can't talk up here. You got to give them the data. And once they have the data, it's another world. Okay, so here's some unique approaches. And again, it's hard in 20 minutes to go through all of this, but we can talk in more details for specific projects. And some of this came up earlier, which is very good, so it's a nice segue. So usually the numbers are not very large in orphan, particularly in very rare diseases, they're not going to be large at all. Again, as I said, for Gaucher, we did 30 patients, and then we had a switch over from Cerezyme, which was Genzyme's product, so we looked at another 30 people who were on previous treatment, open label. What we did was unique, and we were very pleased with Gaucher, is we just did a dose response, because it was a drug similar to Genzyme's drug, but it was made in plant cells. So when there was a shortage, because Genzyme had a problem with manufacturing, FDA called us up and said, could we put our product on the market before it was approved? And they said, we're also going to give you orphan drug because it's possible. They turned it down first. And then said this is too similar to Genzyme's drug, but because it was made in plants, it was potentially a safer drug. So you can get orphan drug for even a similar molecule if yours is safer. So we actually had it on the market during the development. It was one of these very unusual things. But because the enzyme was similar, and some of the people in the Gaucher community thought one dose was the concentration that Genzyme was using There were other people who could benefit from a lower dose, so we actually did a dose response in different people. So it's 15 and 15. And while everybody responded, there was a dose response. So, but at least if you're spending $200,000 a year and you can give half the drug, you know, the companies don't like it, but maybe good for insurance and the people. The other thing you can do is if you have to run placebo for some reason, sometimes it's not a bad thing, especially if it's a chronic disease, you know, you may want to run placebo for a little while, then you can always do a rescue. So you can either do, I don't like switchovers, crossovers, because you have what's called treatment effects. You don't know if you treated somebody on active drug and then you move them to placebo, how long that effect takes place, even if there's a washout, you know, period and all that stuff. So I prefer to do parallel studies and then after a certain period of time, take all the non-responders and put them on active drug. Though it's not rare disease, we did this in head lice and FDA bought into it, we did placebo. And the next day if you had head lice, which is not a good thing, we treated them with active drug, they came back the next day and if they still had head lice, they were out. And if they didn't have head lice, they were in the study. So you can do that if it's ethical, okay? But you have to really think it through. And the other thing, which is this stuff that's coming up now with the agency, is this whole issue of the totality of the evidence. And they're starting to see it. So if you have maybe a borderline or some people don't respond at all to the drug, but 60% of them do, and there's safety and there's other things, you can maybe argue this with FDA. Yeah. And again with Daucher, we did, okay, I told you this already, so we can skip it, and head lice, we did it. And the other things that you can do, which is sort of interesting, is that if they're on current drug now, let's say they're on a drug, let's say it's Fabrazyme for some reason, and you have data on, let's say, kidney function and Fabrazyme for 3 years, and you can do a switch over to your drug, whatever your drug happens to be, and use all that baseline data for when they were on the previous drug, and see if you can argue with FDA rather than doing a comparative study, is that be able to go back and strategically and say, okay, I have this value over the last 3 years of this drug, that's my baseline, I now treat my patient, and now I have a paired t-test rather than explore mean of group 1 and mean of group 2, which is a much more powerful event. And I think you could talk to them. And the other way is you can do an uneven randomization. It doesn't have to be 1-to-1. You can go to 2-to-1 or 3-to-1, but you have to be optimistic that it's going to be a big drug effect, because the statistics, the power calculations are a little less if you do not 1-to-1 randomizations. Okay.
I'm giving you the wind it up signal.
One more minute. Okay, I got it. I said okay. She's tough. This is a big group here, and we got to really stay on schedule. You know.
We're heading up to a break where I
know.
know lots of people are going to
I'm looking.
questions.
I said you said it's done
It's
by
20
10:30.
hours.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
Not moving it. Yeah. So when you meet with FDA, and again, some of the stuff came up before. Bring a focus on the quality of life issues. I think it's really important. When we did hereditary angioedema, we actually brought a patient to the meeting with FDA who was like third in line in the Fed, and he actually explained the disease to FDA, but sometimes they don't know these diseases. And if there's a strong signal, try to get accelerated approval. That's some things that I discussed before. I think it's doable, especially in these rare diseases which are chronic and deteriorating. At least try. And if things like fast track and breakthrough, fast track's not too hard to get, but the thing is to try to get it to the market. Okay, thank you.
Thank you all.